She waited 4 years, documented everything. And when her billionaire husband handed her a $500,000 divorce check at their anniversary dinner, she smiled and said just 5 words that would cost him $340 million.
Thank you. This will cost you $340 million.
What? That's impossible. This can't be real. I never signed this.
You did, right here on page 3.
This is insane,
Because I'm not just your attorney.
I'm your wife.
This is the story of the prenup he forgot to read, and the attorney he never knew he married. Because sometimes the perfect wife is the perfect trap.
Sophia, we need to talk.
Go on.
This marriage isn't working. I've had papers drawn up.
I see. Thank you for dinner, Marcus.
The restaurant was called Essence, the kind of place where menus don't have prices and reservations require 6 weeks' notice. Marcus Westbrook had proposed here 4 years ago, and now on their 4th anniversary, he'd chosen it for something else entirely. Sophia Chen watched her husband across the candlelit table, noting the way he checked his phone every 90 seconds. She'd timed it once for curiosity. 90 seconds, like clockwork. "You look beautiful tonight," Marcus said. The compliment automatic, his eyes already drifting back to his screen. "Thank you." Sophia took a sip of the Chateau Margaux he'd ordered. $800 a bottle, she knew, because she'd reviewed this month's credit card statements. He'd bought 3 bottles this week. They'd shared one. Marcus set down his phone with the deliberate gesture of a man who'd rehearsed this moment. "Sophia, we need to talk." Here it was. She'd known it was coming for 6 weeks. Ever since Vanessa had started wearing the Cartier bracelet that cost more than most people's cars. The same bracelet Marcus had told Sophia was too flashy when she'd admired it in a magazine. "I think we should be honest with each other," Marcus continued. "This marriage, it's not working. We both know it." Sophia set down her wine glass with perfect precision. "Go on." He actually looked relieved that she wasn't crying. "We're different people than we were 4 years ago. You want different things. I want different things. There's no point dragging this out." "What do I want, Marcus?" It was the first real question she'd asked him in months. He blinked, caught off guard. "I don't know. Shopping? Charity work? Whatever it is that," he gestured vaguely at her, "it makes you happy." Sophia felt something click into place, the final piece of a puzzle she'd been assembling for years. He genuinely didn't know. 4 years of marriage, 3 years of dating before that, when Marcus Westbrook had no idea that his wife held a Juris Doctor from Columbia, had argued before appellate courts in 3 states, or that she'd turned down a partnership at Morrison and Keller, one of the most prestigious law firms in the country, to marry him. He thought she shopped. "I've had papers drawn up," Marcus said, reaching into his jacket pocket. "My attorney says this is all very straightforward. The prenup is clear. Married less than 5 years. Standard dissolution." He slid an envelope across the table, followed by a check. Sophia saw the amount without picking it up. $500,000. "That's more than the prenup requires," Marcus said, and he actually sounded proud. "I want you to be comfortable. You've been a good wife." The photographer Marcus had hired, disguised as a waiter, poorly, snapped a picture of this tender moment. Sophia had noticed him the moment they'd arrived. She'd also noticed the 2 additional photographers outside, Haas, the journalist from Seattle Metropolitan at the bar, and the social media coordinator Marcus's PR firm had planted at a nearby table. This wasn't just a divorce, it was a press release. "I'll have my attorney contact yours," Sophia said simply, folding the check and placing it in her purse. Marcus smiled, visibly relaxed now. "Gerald Richmond. He's expecting the call. This'll all be finalized in 30 days, and we can both move on with our lives." "Gerald Richmond," Sophia repeated. And it was she knew Gerald. Old money attorney, Yale law class of 1979, senior partner at Richmond and Howe. He'd opposed her twice in contract disputes. He'd lost both times, but he'd never connected the sharp young attorney who demolished his arguments with Marcus Westbrook's decorative wife. "He's the best," Marcus said. "My father used him for decades." "I'm sure he is." Sophia stood, gathering her clutch. "Thank you for dinner, Marcus. And for the 4 years." He stood too, looking almost fond now that the hard part was over. "You really are taking this well. I appreciate that." "Of course." Sophia kissed his cheek, a perfect performance for the cameras. After all, we both want what's fair. She left him there, surrounded by the evidence of his own generosity. The journalist would report that Marcus Westbrook had graciously ended his marriage with dignity and exceptional financial consideration. His reputation would remain intact. For 30 more days. Out in her car, Sophia opened her phone and called a number she'd programmed 3 years ago, but never dialed. Chen and Associates Legal Consultancy answered a voice she recognized, her former mentor, Patricia Chen, who'd retired from Morrison and Keller to open a boutique firm specializing in complex marital asset cases. Patricia, Sophia said quietly, it's time. File the response. The shell firm? Yes, I'll represent myself through Hawthorne Legal Group. Marcus's team won't connect it to me until discovery. You're sure about this? Sophia thought about the prenup, about Clause 12C on page 147, the amendment Patricia had quietly negotiated with the Westbrook family attorney 7 years ago, the clause that made this entire charade possible. I've never been more sure of anything. She ended the call and looked at the check Marcus had given her. $500,000. He thought he was being generous. He had no idea what generous actually cost. Gerald Richmond's office occupied the entire 42nd floor of the Columbia Tower, with windows overlooking Elliott Bay and a conference table that could seat 20. He'd summoned Sophia for what he called a brief procedural meeting with the confidence of a man who'd handled 300 divorces without breaking a sweat. Sophia arrived alone, carrying a single leather portfolio. Mrs. Westbrook, Gerald stood, extending his hand with practiced warmth. Please, sit. This shouldn't take long. The prenuptial agreement is quite clear, and your husband has been exceedingly generous beyond its requirements. Ms. Chen, actually, Sophia corrected, settling into the chair across from him. I kept my name professionally. Gerald's smile faltered for just a fraction. Of course, Ms. Chen. Now I've prepared the standard dissolution documents. All we need is your signature acknowledging receipt of the settlement funds, and we can begin the 30-day waiting period. I'd like to request a 90-day discovery period instead. Gerald actually laughed. Discovery? Ms. Chen, there's nothing to discover. The prenup delineates all assets clearly. Mr. Westbrook's business holdings are separate property, established before the marriage. You're entitled to exactly what's specified in the agreement, which my client has already exceeded. Sophia opened her portfolio and slid a single sheet across the table. Washington is a community property state. I'm entitled to review all marital assets acquired or enhanced during our marriage. 90 days is standard for complex estates. Gerald scanned the document, a formal discovery request filed by Hawthorne Legal Group. His eyebrows rose slightly. You've retained counsel? Of course. May I ask who's representing you from Hawthorne? I'm not familiar with the firm. Sarah Michaels, Sophia said smoothly, naming the junior attorney Patricia had brought into the shell firm specifically for this case. She's new to Seattle, transferred from our New York office. It wasn't technically a lie. Sarah had worked in New York, just not for Hawthorne Legal Group, because Hawthorne Legal Group had been incorporated exactly 6 weeks ago for the sole purpose of representing Sophia without revealing her involvement. Gerald leaned back, reassessing. Ms. Chen, I'm going to be frank with you. E-discovery is expensive. Attorney fees, forensic accountants, depositions. You're looking at $200,000 minimum, likely more. The settlement you've been offered is $500,000. You'd be spending your entire settlement trying to find assets that don't exist. Then you should have no objection to the discovery period. Something shifted in Gerald's expression. The grandfatherly warmth cooled into calculation. What exactly are you looking for? Transparency, Sophia said. Surely, mister. Uncle Westbrook has nothing to hide. Gerald studied her for a long moment. She met his gaze without blinking, the way she'd learned in courtrooms when opposing counsel tried to intimidate her into settlement. Fine, Gerald said finally. 90 days. But when this comes up empty, we'll expect your cooperation in expediting the final paperwork. Of course. Sophia left his office and waited until she was in the parking garage before allowing herself a small smile. Gerald had agreed because he was arrogant, because he believed a trophy wife couldn't possibly understand the complexity of asset discovery, because he'd underestimated her completely. They all had. 60 days later, the Hawthorne Legal Group conference room was modest compared to Gerald's palatial setup. Just a small space in a shared office building in Fremont. But it was private, and that's what mattered. Sophia sat surrounded by 7 years of Marcus Westbrook's financial life. He laid out in meticulous spreadsheets and cross-referenced documents. Her forensic accountant, David Chen, no relation, though she'd let people assume, worked across from her, his laptop displaying a web of transactions that told a story Marcus never intended anyone to read. "The Paris apartment is the smoking gun," David said, highlighting a series of wire transfers. "He purchased it 6 months before he proposed to you. The lease is in Vanessa Rhodes's name, but the payments flow through Westbrook Holdings, LLC, a shell company he controls personally." Sophia made a note. "What's the total expenditure on Vanessa across all categories?" David scrolled through his analysis. Direct gifts, travel, the apartment, jewelry, $2.3 million over 6 years. But here's what's interesting. He pulled up a second screen. Vanessa's salary as his executive assistant is $120,000 annually. Her tax returns show no other income. Yet her personal spending over the past 3 years averages $340,000 per year. "The embezzlement," Sophia said quietly. "Exactly. She's created phantom vendors, freelance consultants, IT services, marketing firms, all billing Westbrook Technologies for work that was never performed. The payments go to accounts she controls, then get laundered through a series of transfers before landing in her personal checking." Sophia studied the transaction map. It was elegant, really. Vanessa had hidden her theft in the chaos of Marcus's legitimate business expenses, knowing he never looked at the details. Why would he? He had accountants for that, except his accountants were processing thousands of transactions monthly, and Vanessa had carefully kept each fraudulent invoice under $15,000, just below the threshold that would trigger additional scrutiny. "How much total?" Sophia asked. $4.7 million, give or take. Sophia sat back, processing. Marcus was having an affair with a woman who was systematically robbing him, and he had no idea about either betrayal, the emotional or the financial. She could have told him. 3 years ago, when she'd first noticed the discrepancies, she could have warned him. That's what a good wife would have done. But Sophia had stopped being a good wife the moment she'd realized Marcus would never see her as anything more than an ornament. Instead, she'd watched, documented, waited. Right, because the prenup had a clause that Marcus's attorney had overlooked, that Marcus himself had never read, and that clause required proof of infidelity to trigger. Vanessa wasn't just Marcus's mistress, she was Sophia's evidence. "Compile everything," Sophia said. "I want a presentation ready for the hearing. Timeline, transaction records, photographs, travel records, everything that proves the affair started before our marriage and continued throughout." David nodded. "Why the judge is going to ask why you didn't report the embezzlement earlier." "And I'll tell the truth," Sophia said. "I'm not Westbrook Technologies' CFO. I'm not their auditor. I'm Marcus's wife, was his wife. It wasn't my job to protect him from his own poor judgment." She gathered her papers, preparing to leave. At the door, she paused. "David, make sure the embezzlement evidence is airtight, criminal prosecution level. I want Vanessa to face consequences beyond just losing Marcus." "Already done. I flagged it for the King County Prosecutor's Office. Once it's entered into divorce proceedings, it becomes public record. They'll have to investigate." Sophia nodded. Some people might call this revenge. She called it accountability. After all, contracts had terms, and every term had consequences.
What is all that?
This is Westbrook v. Westbrook.
I understand this was an uncontested dissolution?
Hi.
The King County Superior Court hearing room was smaller than people expected. No dramatic high ceilings or imposing judge's bench like in the movies. Just fluorescent lights, beige walls, and the quiet hum of a ventilation system that had needed replacing for a decade. Marcus sat beside Gerald Richmond at the respondents' table, dressed in a navy Tom Ford suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent. He looked relaxed, almost bored. When this was supposed to be a formality, a judge's signature on papers already agreed upon. Sophia entered carrying 3 banker's boxes. Marcus's expression shifted from boredom to confusion. What is all that? Gerald leaned over, whispering something, but his face had gone pale. He'd received Sophia's filing 24 hours ago, the formal invocation of prenuptial clause 12C. He'd spent those 24 hours rereading a contract he'd assumed he knew by heart, and now then calling the original attorney who drafted it, who'd retired to Scottsdale and barely remembered the Westbrook account. Judge Catherine Morrison entered, a 63-year-old former prosecutor known for her impatience with wealthy litigants who wasted her time. She'd seen every divorce trick in the book, and her calendar was packed. "This is Westbrook versus Westbrook," she said, settling into her chair. "I've reviewed the initial filings. Mr. Richmond, I understand this was supposed to be an uncontested dissolution?" Gerald stood. "Your Honor, that was our understanding. However, Mrs. Westbrook has raised certain complications." "Ms. Chen, Your Honor," Sophia corrected, standing. "I retain my professional name." Judge Morrison's eyes sharpened with interest. "You're representing yourself, Ms. Chen?" "I am, Your Honor, through Hawthorne Legal Group, which I oversee." "You're an attorney?" "Columbia Law, 2012. I've practiced in corporate litigation and mergers and acquisitions for 11 years. Marcus actually turned to stare at her. Sophia didn't look at him. Judge Morrison made a note. "Proceed, Ms. Chen." Sophia opened the first banker's box. "Your Honor, I'm invoking Clause 12C of the prenuptial agreement executed on June 15, 2019. The clause reads, in the event of marital infidelity substantiated by documented evidence, all protective clauses become void, and marital assets default to community property standards per Washington state law." Gerald was on his feet. "Your Honor, this is a desperate attempt to—" "I have documentation," Sophia continued calmly. She placed a bound presentation on the judge's bench. 147 photographs across 4 continents, credit card receipts totaling $2.3 million, hotel records, text message transcripts legally obtained from Mr. Westbrook's company-issued phone, which I had authorized access to as a board member of Westbrook Technologies, and lease agreements for a Paris apartment occupied by Mr. Westbrook's executive assistant, Vanessa Rhodes. The courtroom went completely silent. Judge Morrison opened the presentation. Her expression remained neutral, but Sophia saw her eyebrows rise slightly as she flipped through pages of evidence that told a story impossible to deny. Marcus grabbed Gerald's arm. "Oh, what is she talking about? What clause?" Gerald was speed-reading the prenup on his tablet, his fingers shaking slightly as he scrolled to page 147. Sophia watched the moment he found it, the blood draining from his face, the sudden understanding that he'd missed something catastrophic. "Your Honor," Gerald tried again, his voice less certain. "Even if there was an indiscretion—" "6 years of indiscretion," Sophia corrected, "beginning 8 months before Mr. Westbrook proposed to me and continuing throughout our entire marriage. The Paris apartment was purchased in March 2019. Our engagement was announced in April 2019. Judge Morrison looked up from the presentation. "Mr. Westbrook, do you dispute these allegations?" Marcus seemed to struggle with the question. Finally, "I don't see how my personal life is relevant to a contract that clearly states—" "The contract clearly states that infidelity voids its protections," Judge Morrison interrupted. "Ekri, did you read your prenuptial agreement, Mr. Westbrook?" "My attorney, did you personally read it?" Marcus's silence was answer enough. Judge Morrison turned to Sophia. "Ms. Chen, you mentioned company phone access. Explain." "Mr. Westbrook's father insisted I take a board position at Westbrook Technologies when we married. For optics, he said, the company requires all board members to have access to executive communications for governance oversight. I've never used that access until preparing for these proceedings, and all data was obtained through proper legal channels with IT department cooperation." It was technically true. The IT department had cooperated because Sophia had submitted the request through official board channels, citing routine compliance review. They'd handed over everything without question because board members had that authority. Judge Morrison made several notes. "And you've brought additional evidence beyond the infidelity claim?" This was the moment Sophia had been building toward for 3 years. "Yes, Your Honor. During my review of company communications, I discovered evidence of systematic embezzlement by Ms. Vanessa Rhodes." Over 3 years, she created phantom vendors and approved fraudulent invoices totaling $4.7 million. Marcus exploded out of his chair. You knew? Ari, you knew she was stealing from my company and you said nothing? Judge Morrison's gavel cracked like a gunshot. Mr. Westbrook, sit down. But Marcus wasn't listening. He turned on Sophia, his face red with rage. For how long? How long have you known? Sophia met his eyes with perfect calm. 3 years. And you just watched? Let her rob me? I'm not your CFO, Marcus. I'm not your auditor. I'm not your accountant. I was your wife. She paused. And you never once asked me what I did for a living. The silence that followed was devastating. Judge Morrison reviewed the embezzlement documentation, bank records, transaction logs, vendor verification reports, showing the companies didn't exist. It was meticulous, prosecutable, and damning. Ms. Chen, why didn't you report this to the proper authorities? I wasn't certain it was criminal until I had time to review all the evidence thoroughly, Your Honor. I'm not a forensic accountant. I needed expert analysis to confirm my suspicions. That analysis was completed 2 weeks ago, and I've already flagged it for the King County Prosecutor's Office as required by law. It was a careful answer, true enough to avoid perjury, vague enough to avoid admitting she'd sat on evidence for tactical advantage. Judge Morrison closed the presentation folder. I'm ordering a full financial disclosure of all marital assets. Mr. Richmond, your client will cooperate fully. We'll reconvene in 14 days for asset division proceedings. As for the embezzlement evidence, I'm forwarding this to the prosecutor's office myself. She looked at Marcus with something that might have been pity. Mr. Westbrook, you should have read your contract. The office space occupied 2 floors of a modern building in downtown Seattle, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Puget Sound. The brass nameplate by the elevator read, Sophia Chen Legal Consultancy, specializing in complex marital asset protection. Sophia stood at those windows now, watching ferries cross the water, a cup of coffee cooling in her hand. Her assistant had tried to schedule her afternoon with back-to-back consultations, but Sophia had blocked out the last hour. She knew he was coming. The receptionist's voice came through the intercom. Ms. Chen, Mr. Westbrook is here. Send him in. Marcus entered, looking diminished somehow, despite the expensive suit and the confidence he usually wore like armor. 6 months of public scrutiny had done that. The news coverage of Vanessa's arrest, the shareholder questions about his judgment, the think pieces about tech billionaires and their professional wives who turned out to be anything but decorative. You've done well for yourself, Marcus said, looking around the office. Original art on the walls, shelves lined with legal texts and case files, photos of Sophia in courtrooms and congressional hearings that he'd never seen before. I've always done well for myself, Sophia replied. You just never asked. Marcus moved to the wall of photographs. One showed Sophia at 29, standing on the steps of the Supreme Court building, and another captured her shaking hands with a senator after testifying about corporate merger regulations. A third showed her receiving an award from the American Bar Association. I never knew, he said quietly. You never looked. He turned to face her. That's why you married me, isn't it? You wanted to see if I would, if I'd ever bothered to find out who you actually were. Sophia considered lying, then decided he'd earned the truth. Partially. I also loved you once. In or loved the idea of you, the man you could have been if you'd ever seen past yourself. When did you stop? Our first anniversary. You gave a speech at the charity gala about how important it was to really see people, to recognize their worth beyond their surface value. Then you came home and asked if I'd picked up your dry cleaning. Marcus actually winced. The prenup clause was standard protection in 12 states for the non-moneyed spouse. My mentor, Patricia, negotiated it with your family attorney 7 years ago. She hid it in subsection amendments that she knew no one would read carefully. Your father's lawyer was sloppy, Gerald Richmond was arrogant, and you, Sophia paused, you thought I was too simple to understand contracts. I never thought you were simple. You thought I was uncomplicated, which is worse. Sophia set down her coffee. You thought you'd married someone who needed you. Nah, it never occurred to you that maybe I was someone who could destroy you. The embezzlement, why didn't you tell me? This was the question Sophia had known was coming. the one she prepared for. Because it wasn't my job to protect you from your own choices, Marcus. You chose Vanessa. You chose not to review your own finances. You chose not to read your prenup. You chose not to learn who your wife actually was. Those are business mistakes, personal mistakes. Vanessa committed a crime, and she's serving 6 years for it. The prosecutor was very grateful for the evidence I compiled. But Marcus, I had no legal obligation to report my suspicions before I was certain. I'm not a forensic accountant. I'm not your employee. I was your wife, and you never once asked me for advice, for help, for anything except to look pretty at your events. The anger in his face collapsed into something else. Recognition, maybe, or regret. I lost $340 million because I didn't read a contract, he said. You lost $340 million because you committed adultery for 6 years and never thought there would be consequences. The contract just made those consequences legally binding. Marcus walked to the window, standing beside her. Below, the city moved on without them. People heading home, lives being lived, none of them caring about billionaire divorces or prenuptial clauses. Vanessa's attorney tried to blame you. You know, Marcus said you deliberately withheld evidence of a crime. I'm sure they did. Didn't work though, did it? No. The prosecutor said you flagged it the moment you were certain, said your documentation actually made their case airtight. He looked at her. You could have destroyed me completely. The company, my reputation, everything. Why didn't you? Sophia considered the question. Because despite everything, you're not a bad person, Marcus. You're just limited. You see what's directly in front of you and nothing beyond it. I didn't need to destroy you. I just needed to be free of you. And $340 million was half of what we built together. Whether you acknowledge it or not, my connections, my legal expertise, my strategic advice at board meetings you thought were just formalities. All of that contributed to Westbrook Technology's growth. I earned that money. The prenup just gave me a way to claim it. Marcus pulled something from his pocket, a business card. His new attorney, Sophia noticed. Someone younger, sharper, from a firm that specialized in bulletproof contracts. I'm getting married again, he said, next spring. Congratulations. My attorney spent 6 months on the prenup. He's triple-checked every clause, every subsection, every amendment. It's 200 pages long, and I've read every word. That's good, Marcus. That's growth. He laughed. How bitter. You taught me an expensive lesson. I taught you to read your contracts. What you do with that lesson is up to you. Sophia walked to her desk, a silent signal that this conversation was ending. Was there something specific you needed, or did you just come to see if I'd gloat? I came to ask if you ever really loved me. The question hung in the air between them, honest and raw, in a way Marcus had never been during their marriage. Sophia thought about the answer, and about the young woman who'd accepted his proposal in this very restaurant 4 years ago, who'd hoped that maybe love could be more interesting than winning cases. Yes, she said finally, I loved the man I hoped you'd become. I stopped loving you when I realized you were comfortable exactly as you were. Marcus nodded, accepting this. At the door, he paused. The book you're writing, when it comes out, am I going to hate it? Sophia smiled. You're going to recognize yourself. Whether you hate that is up to you. After he left, Sophia returned to the window. Her assistant buzzed again. A new client consultation, a tech executive going through a divorce, worried her husband was hiding assets in cryptocurrency. Give me 5 minutes, Sophia said, then send her in. She opened her laptop to the manuscript she'd been working on. Chapter 12, The Contracts We Don't Read. The chapter about Marcus was nearly finished. She just needed an ending. She typed, in the end, Tahora, the most expensive lesson wasn't about money. It was about attention, about what we choose to see in the people we claim to love. Marcus Westbrook could afford to lose $340 million. What he couldn't afford was the realization that for 7 years he'd been married to someone he'd never bothered to know. Sophia saved the file and closed her laptop. The new client would be here any moment. Another woman who'd been underestimated, another story of assets hidden in contracts misread. And Sophia would help her, the way no one had helped Sophia. Because that was the other lesson Marcus never learned. The people you underestimate are the ones who'll surprise you most. The phone buzzed. Her client was here. Sophia stood, straightened her jacket, and prepared to do what she did best. Read the contracts everyone else ignored, and find the clauses that changed everything. Outside her window, the Seattle skyline glittered in the afternoon sun. Somewhere in that city, a Marcus Westbrook was reading a 200-page prenuptial agreement, finally understanding that words on paper mattered. Somewhere else, Vanessa Rhodes was in her 4th year of a 6-year sentence, learning the same lesson from a very different angle. And here in this office, built from half a billionaire's fortune and a lifetime of expertise everyone had overlooked, Sophia Chen was doing exactly what she'd always been meant to do. Winning. Not because she'd destroyed Marcus Westbrook, but because she'd freed herself from being invisible. The intercom buzzed again. "Ms. Chen, your 4 o'clock is ready." Sophia smiled. "Send her in."